All right, here we go. Today we have the first ever interview with Mia Santoro, who was an unnamed juvenile co-defendant in the 2016 case involving Tay-K, where one man was killed and another was shot during a home invasion robbery. This is a very complicated story involving kids, drugs, sex trafficking, money, and ultimately multiple murders. And this is the first time that somebody from the case is sitting down and telling the whole story. So Mia, thank you so much for coming to Vlad TV.
Thank you, Vlad.
Well, I want to start from the very beginning. So you grew up in Fort Worth, Texas?
I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, and my parents moved to a house in Arlington when I was about 5.
Okay. And how would you describe your childhood when you were a kid?
My family is very Italian and very family-oriented based. And so, growing up, I had a good childhood. We lived in a nice home in a cul-de-sac. We lived on the lake. We had a pool in the backyard. My dad was super strict. My mom was like the loving, comforting one. And I have a brother and a sister. And so, we had a nice big family and life was really normal.
Okay, so there's 3 kids and your parents are together and they're working, but they're bartenders?
Yes, both of my parents were bartenders.
Okay, so that meant that at nights they were usually gone.
So my parents were only off Sunday, Monday, but they worked the rest of the week. And so my parents would always leave at 2 or 3 and be home at like 2 or 3 in the morning.
Okay. And, as I was going through the whole story, you said that you were just left at home alone. And at one point when you were 13, you tweeted, I woke up to an empty house. My mom ignores me. Sometimes I wish my parents didn't work so much.
Yeah. So kind of when I turned like 10, 11, my parents were like, okay, you're at that age, like your brothers can watch you. And like growing up, I spent a lot of time at my grandma's house when my parents were at work because I was so young. And as I got older and my grandma was getting older, I was just left with like my brother or my sister. And my brother's 5 years older than me, my sister's 6 years older than me. So when I was 10, 11, they're 15, 16, 17, and wanted to do their own thing. And so I either got left alone or dragged along with them.
Now, your parents are bartenders, but they had somewhat of a drinking problem themselves?
Yeah, for sure. Both my parents definitely growing up were alcoholics.
Okay, and how did that affect you at home?
To me, it was regular. I didn't know anything else different besides, like them coming home and having a drink or, on their days off, Sunday, Monday was like Sunday fun day. And, my parents, we had a pool in the backyard, they drank, but like sometimes my dad would get like super drunk and sometimes him and my mom would fight or, he would be pretty belligerent. And so I grew up in a household where I saw like a lot of fighting. My parents were, not a day went by where they weren't drinking. And I think it affected me a lot because there was no attention really on me. Like, they focused on drinking. I'm not saying that they weren't great parents. I had a nice house. I had food. I never went without a meal. I never went without new clothes. My parents took me to and from school. They were at all of my, functions. I ran track. I played basketball. I played volleyball. I did everything like a normal kid did. So in the time I didn't know that it was really affecting me until things started going a different way in my life. But growing up, my parents definitely were alcoholics.
Okay, so you have an older brother named Vinny.
Yes.
And he was playing football, ended up hurting his shoulder. They gave him painkillers, and he ended up getting addicted to the painkillers.
Yeah, so when he was in high school, he played football, and he was really good at Martin High School. And in one of his tackles, he hurt his shoulder, and he had to get shoulder surgery. And they prescribed him, like, opioids and, painkillers and everything. And because the surgery was so bad and so long, he was taking pills for probably about 2-3 months. And then afterwards, he kind of got, like, hooked on them. And so that's when my parents, they gravitated towards my brother because they started realizing, like, he had a problem. He was addicted to drugs. Him and my dad would fight a lot because my dad was, like, on him very hard, about, like, hey, you have this career, your shoulder's healing. I want you to be focused in sports and focused in school, my brother would be gone a lot, or he would, come up, missing for a day or two and, doing his own thing. And my parents actually found him at Lake Arlington, and he was like in the process of ODing on the side of the road. And so we rushed over there to my brother and, saved him, and he got in the car, and my parents were just, focused on really trying to keep my brother alive because he had such an addiction. I mean, it was so bad that my brother, sold my mom's wedding ring, would take my shoes out of my closet, sell it to Plato's Closet. He was in a really bad addiction, which ended up, getting him an 8-year sentence.
Right. He got arrested for aggravated robbery and got 8 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So at age 12, this is around 2012, you met Ariana.
Correct.
And she was 17 at the time.
I believe so.
I mean, look, you're 24 right now?
Yes.
If you're 24 and you meet a 29-year-old, it's not really a big deal.
Right.
Right? You guys have a lot in common. But a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old, how does that friendship start?
So like I said earlier, I was either dragged with my brother and sister, if not left at home. And so I started hanging out with my brother. My brother was doing drugs, hanging around people who, weren't the best people, influences on him or for me to be 12 years old to be around. And that's how I met Ariana. And so I was at a party and I saw Ariana there, and everybody was smoking weed. I had never smoked weed or done drugs before. And so I was sitting next to her on a couch, at a party, which was a known drug house back in the day in Arlington. And, she offered me to smoke the weed with her, and I hit it one time and was high and laughing and liked it. I was 12. I didn't know any better. I was around all older people my whole life. And so I thought, it was normal, and I thought it was cool. I'm 12. These people are older. I thought this was, cool to hang out with the older crowd, and, they're accepting of me. My sister never let me hang out with her friends, or kind of really be a bond with my sister, or have any type of really relationship with her growing up, because she was always doing her own thing with cheerleading and gymnastics, and she was normal, like you said. She was 6 years older than me, so she wasn't dragging me around with her friends, 6 years younger than her friends. They didn't do that.
Okay. And Ariana was a drug dealer?
Yes.
What was she selling mostly?
Bars, coke, and weed.
Okay. At one point, you started selling drugs with her?
Yeah, so after the initial time that I met her at the party, she put her phone number in my phone, and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat. And so, she would always tell me, hey, if you need anything, I can get you weed and get you whatever you want, because my brother was, saying I'm not going to give you any weed, I'm not going to give you drugs and stuff like that. When I started smoking weed, my brother was I'm not going to give you any of my weed. So Ariana would just give me free weed and pick me up from school or pick me up from the house, and I would just get to ride around and smoke with her. So when she was selling drugs, she kind of just showed me what things were worth, how you sell them. And so since I was with her every day, I just started doing what she did.
At what point did you actually start going to strip clubs with Ariana?
I was about 13 years old, right before I turned 13 years old. And the time when I first met her, we were always going to parties and going to the mall and doing regular kid stuff, which I thought, was cool, and I enjoyed it. And I ended up really thinking this was my friend, not knowing how much, not really thinking about how much older she was. Because now, speaking of this story, when I'm 24 years old, I look at it in a different light as a grown woman and as a mother. And I look at it back then. If I would have known then what I know now, I would have known it's not normal for me to be, hanging out with this older girl, or for this older girl to have so much interest in me. So first, when it started off with just seeing her at parties, or her picking me up from school, or seeing her at school functions, or, going to water parks and, regular stuff, when she started taking me to trap houses and strip clubs right before I turned 13, I didn't really say anything or think anything of it, because, this is my friend that I've known for a year, and what she thinks is cool, I want to think is cool. So I was about almost 13 years old when she started taking me to strip clubs.
Okay. So how does a 12-year-old react to being in a strip club? And why are like the owners of the strip club or the security not saying anything when they see you there?
So every time we went to the strip club, they always played like the owners or like the house people in the front, like extra money for me to get in, because normally when you go to a strip club, you're supposed to show like a form of identification and show that you're at least 18 years or older, some clubs 21. And so, you know, they would always pay the people under the table like they were friends with them, they knew them, and it's like they knew that they had, you know, a bunch of kids with them coming in, and so they would just pay the door people money and we would go in. And my initial time going to the strip club, it was weird and uncomfortable, and I've never seen naked women, or, you know, the only alcohol and stuff I've ever been around was seeing my parents at home drink. So seeing like bottle girls walk around and people on strip poles, like it was weird and uncomfortable for me.
Okay, now during this time with Ariana, was there any physical violence?
So it really started off, you know, she was a drug dealer. I would see her sell drugs, and sometimes she would get into altercations with people. So I'd always see her be aggressive towards other people. She was never aggressive towards me until we went to this strip club the first initial time. And, you know, I was hesitant and it was weird. And, you know, like being so young, when you see sexual stuff, it makes you feel weird. It makes you feel uncomfortable. You feel like you're doing something wrong. And so, you know, when we got into the car that night, I told her, like, you know, that was weird. Like, you know, I don't really enjoy going to the strip club. And she had like backhanded me in the mouth and like started putting her hands on me and was like, you know, you don't talk to me like that. Like, I'm your friend. I'm your best friend. You don't talk to me like that. Like, I would never put you in a situation that would make you uncomfortable or weird or that would hurt you. Like, why are you talking like that?
Okay, so at one point in 2014, you're 14 years old, Ariana introduced you to an older man in his late 20s.
Yes.
Okay, how did that initial meeting go?
So this whole time she's, you know, still taking me to strip clubs and out of town, and I went to South by Southwest, and, you know, I'm like gone from home from her, and she started telling me basically, you know, like, for years I've been buying you weed and buying you shoes and taking you to the mall and taking you to strip clubs. Like, you know, you're old enough to where you can start like hustling and, you know, like pay me back. And so I'm thinking, you know, like, okay, I'm gonna sell some drugs for her, or, you know, do whatever she needs to pay her back, because I'm thinking like, this is my friend, you know, she always has money on her. I didn't think anything of it. And so she takes me to a house in Fort Worth, which happened to be right down the house from my grandmother's house. And I meet this guy, and she said that it was her cousin. So I didn't, you know, I wasn't uncomfortable in the initial beginning because this was her cousin. Everybody was just sitting there smoking weed. And he brought me into the back room and was like, hey, can you help me like count some money? And so I go into the back room, and he ended up raping me that night while Ariana was in the living room. And I came out and I was like super uncomfortable, and I was crying and I was trying to leave, and Ariana kind of stopped me and like told me like, this is how you're going to start paying us back. And what I didn't know that day is that he gave her $2,000 to buy me from her.
Were you a virgin at the time?
Yes, I was.
Oh, I'm sorry you have to go through that. Okay, so what happens next?
I went home to my grandma's house, and I wanted to say something to my grandma, but as soon as I got home, well, first, at this point, I'm living with my grandma. So my parents had seen that, you know, my parents thought, you know, their initial thought, like, she's being bad, she's being rebellious, you know, we think she's smoking weed, she's hanging out with older people. My parents had already had multiple run-ins with Ariana at this time where they were, you know, telling her, like, why are you hanging out with our daughter? My brother had told her, like, you know, why are you hanging out with my little sister? My sister had a run-in with her, you know, saying, you know, why are you hanging out with my baby sister who's not even a teen yet? You know, this is when I was still 12, about to be 13. So my parents, you know, were like, hey, we're trying to focus on Vinny right now. At the time, my parents had been going through infidelity issues, and it was just too much for them to handle. My parents were at a point where they wanted to break up and get a divorce, and my mom was always covering for my brother, and nobody was really paying attention to me, and I was getting in trouble, and I was hanging around the wrong crowd, and, at this point, I'm like smoking weed and doing drugs with Ariana, popping bars and drinking lean. And so my parents were like, she's too much to handle, send her to her grandmother's house. And so I went to my grandmother's house, and I went home that day after the initial rape. And I wanted to tell my grandma, but I remember getting into the shower and just feeling so like dirty and ashamed. And I felt like, I was going to get in trouble because I had never had sex before, and it was uncomfortable and it was weird. And, like this man was in his 20s, a 6'5", almost 300-pound man. I'm barely 14 years old, a young, small, I was very petite growing up, and I was a young girl. So my main focus when I got home was just like I wanted to take a shower. I wanted to try to wash it away and not think about it. And I wanted to tell my grandma initially because growing up at my grandma's house, we used to see this man next door. So I was already pretty comfortable with, I didn't know that this was her cousin because growing up next door, my grandma had a friend who, sometimes would watch me, and my grandma would go to work and, they had kids. There would be bounce houses outside. We would hang out next door, and he would often, pull up next door because that's where his grandmother lived, right next door to my grandma's house. But his real house was around the street, like down the street. So I'm scared that if I tell my grandma, her friend's going to know, and they're going to tell the guy. And he, told me if I told anybody that he was going to hurt me even worse. They had guns in the house. They were always beating people up. And so I didn't say anything in the beginning.
How long after the situation did you actually start stripping?
So after the initial situation, she would take me to his house a couple more times after that, where he would rape me more and more and like tell me, you have a debt to pay back, and I'm going to show you how you're going to pay that debt back, and if you tell anybody, these are the consequences A, B, and C. And so, I just went along with like, okay, I'm going to do whatever they need me to do. So they took me back to this strip club that I had been going to for a couple years, and the bouncers already knew me, the strippers already knew me, the front house people already knew me because this is the place where they used to go hang out and sell drugs at. And they would bring me along for years. So they're like, well, you already know this place, you already know, you're familiar with everybody, so we're just going to have you first be like a bottle service girl, and you can do bottle service. And so I get to the club, and they put me on, lingerie, and they put fishnets on, and they put high heels on, and they do my makeup, and they put wigs, and they put long hair and all types of stuff on. And, I was shaking, and I was super nervous, and I told them, like, I don't want to do this. And I tried to leave the strip club that night, where they beat me so bad and then dropped me off at a Taco Bell unconscious.
During this time, you're living with your grandmother?
Yes.
I guess the question is, why do you go back? You have a place to live.
So everybody asked this question, and this was like a really big question for everybody, like the DAs and the judge, like, in everybody's mind, they think that, have you ever seen the movie Taken?
Yeah.
People think that you physically have to be stolen from your home or tied to a bed or in handcuffs, or you have to have a gun to your head 24/7 for you to be, forced to do something or taken back to the people who are initially hurting you. Well, when you're a 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old little girl, you don't have the mindset of, I'm 24 years old right now. Nobody could do that to me today. I know how to ask for help. I understand what they're doing is wrong. I know that there's resources out there to help me. When you're 12 and 13 and 14 years old and you're getting raped by older people that you feel you're comfortable with, your parents aren't paying you attention, your grandma works 2 jobs, you don't want to burden her or make her feel like, I'd already got sent to my grandma's house. If something's going wrong at my grandma's house and these are the people who live next door and down the street from her, then where are they going to send me now? Where am I going to live? What are they going to do to me? Am I going to be in trouble? My dad was always super hard on me. And, my dad comes from a very strict Italian family where his dad was in the military his whole life, so he was the type of person, like his initial thought is, what did you do wrong? And so me being a little girl, I'm like, I don't want my dad to know that this is happening to me. He's going to feel like I'm in trouble or I'm doing something wrong. And so when they started really taking me to the strip club and making me strip and beating me up, and I initially came out and I asked for help, and I told my parents I'm being raped. They're taking me to strip clubs. And so my parents took me to a police station, and the police told my parents that I was crazy and that this is a cry for attention because I was a bad kid, and they put me in a mental institution for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And then in this mental institution, my mom came and visited me. And, mental institutions, when they have kids that are bad or they think you're a nutcase, they pump you up with a bunch of drugs. So I just went from being with these people who pumped me up with a bunch of drugs and was raping me and making me go to strip clubs, now to a mental institution where they're pumping me up with drugs. My mom came and visited me one day, and I'm foaming at the mouth and slobbering, out of my mouth because I'm so drugged up in this, mental institution. So my mom saw me, drooling at my mouth, and she went to like the director and was like, look, I want to take her out myself. I don't want her here anymore. If there's something going on with our daughter, we're going to figure it out ourselves. So my initial outreach and outpour to my parents was just kind of like, you're a liar. The police called me a liar. My dad, as a man was like, you can't put those allegations on anybody. You need to give us names. You need to tell us who it is. You're not going to put those allegations on a man that can put somebody away for life. So if you're lying, tell me right now. So I'm already thinking, oh, he thinks I'm a liar. So I'm like, okay, I'm lying. I'm not going to tell you anything else. So I got taken back to my grandma's house. My grandma's the one who was like, there's bruises all over her. She looks malnourished. She won't eat. She doesn't talk to anybody. She's so different from the little girl when she was growing up. Like, there has to be something going on. So anytime my grandma tried to talk to me, I would just cry. And, my grandma would hold me and, tell me, like, you can tell me what's going on. And I never told anything or, wanted to tell them who it really was or what was going on. These people were beating me, putting guns to my head, burning me with cigarettes. I had a permanent tattoo on my arm where they marked me as their property. I was sold to a man for $2,000. At 12 and 13 years old, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't want to go to the strip club. I didn't want to be raped. I wanted my parents to believe me, and they called me a liar. The police put me in a mental institution. It was like time after time, as I'm trying to get help, and I want to tell people, and I'm telling my trafficker, and I'm telling Ariana I don't want to do this, and I'm getting beat up so bad. I have scars on my eyebrow. I'm being drugged. They're roofing me. I have a permanent scar on my arm where they're shooting me up with drugs. So I'm not in a headspace where I'm like, okay, I have to get help. My headspace was, I have to make it through this night. I have to pay this debt back. I have to do what they tell me to do because I don't want to get beat up, or I don't want to get raped, or I don't want, some drugs in my arm that make me so sick and throw up. So it got to a point where they were putting so much drugs in my arm, I was missing for over 3 months. And this is when the trafficking started, where they would have men come into hotel rooms and pay for me. And I'm just on a bed. And there's men coming in, 30 men, 40 men, 60 men a day. They're making so much money. I can't even look up. There's throw up all over the bed. I'm literally 14 years old. And this whole case and this whole time, I've had judges tell me, you enjoyed what happened to you. You like that lifestyle. No, I was 14 years old being drugged and raped in a hotel room. I did not enjoy what was happening to me. I did not enjoy that lifestyle. There was nothing that they provided for me that I wanted.
Yeah, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I'm actually tearing up right now myself.
And I haven't come out and told this full story because there's so many layers to it, and there's so much that happened. And I've seen what the internet says, and I know how people react in the comments, and I see people say oh, she's a white girl, she got white privilege, she got out. That's not what happened, and I'm here to tell the real story about what everything happened, because nobody looked at me as a victim. And when I was reaching out and trying to get help, and my parents eventually took me to a police department I told the police what was going on. I told them names, I told them addresses, I told them strip clubs, I told them, there's a time where they flew me out to Vegas, and I was in Vegas for 3 months missing. There's years upon years where you can look my name up. There's Facebook posts, there's missing people's persons, there's police report. Everything that I'm telling you today, I have in black and white. This sex trafficking claim is not just a claim that everybody says that me and my attorney cooked up. This is years and years of proof and paperwork that this was going on for years.
Okay, so in 2016, there was a plan that came together where there was a known drug dealer who allegedly had a bunch of money. And there was a plan where you and Ariana would go into the house, and then 4 guys, Letharian, Sean, Jalen, and Traymore, aka Tay-K, would go into the house and rob the guys for all their money. In 2016, there was a plan that came together where there was a known drug dealer who allegedly had a bunch of money. And there was a plan where you and Ariana would go into the house, and then 4 guys, Letharian, Sean, Jalen, and Traymore, aka Tay-K, would go into the house and rob the guys for all their money.
So the headline in itself that's all over the paper says, the girlfriend of the man who got shot and survived set her boyfriend up in a home invasion where they planned for her to go in and have sex with him so they could come in and rob the place. That's trafficking in itself. Y'all are using me as a pawn to have sex with a man to come in for y'all to rob him in his home for drugs and money. And the whole world sits here, and the DA sit here, and the judges sit here and say, we think you at 15 years old made all older people who you never met a day in your life. I don't know Letharian. I don't know Sean. I don't know Pimpies. I don't know Tay-K. I don't know anybody. I've never met these people a day in my life. I can't pick them out of a lineup. I don't know them from a can of paint. But you're telling me I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a car. I didn't know these people, but I hatched this plan out of nowhere and said, hey, let's go rob this drug house because I'm dating someone there and I want us to all go in and rob the place. That never happened. They knew that didn't happen. The judges knew it didn't happen. The DAs know it didn't happen, or I wouldn't be having this conversation with you here today. They know I wasn't the mastermind. I was the youngest person in the case. I was 15 years old. It just simply didn't go that way.
Well, one of the victims in the case, Zachary Belawate, told the jury that you were his girlfriend and that you set him up.
Correct.
How well did you know Zachary before the situation?
I've met him 3 times before this robbery took place. I never had a boyfriend. I met him 3 times before this case ever happened. I believe that the DAs painted this narrative for most of the spotlight to be taken off of certain people and put on me. You know, he also got on the stand and said that he wasn't a drug dealer.
Okay, and the 4 guys that were supposed to come in, Letharian, Sean, Pimpy, I guess is the nickname, and Tay-K, have you ever met them before?
So I only went to junior high for about 1.5 years, and I went to young junior high. And I saw Tamor, passing through the malls or playing football, like passing through the halls and playing football. But I never had like a conversation with him. I never hung out with him. I didn't know who he was. And I definitely, didn't know him as like Tay-K. So I've only seen Tay-K a couple times growing up in school. I didn't know who he was. Never hung out with him. We weren't acquaintances. I didn't have his number. We didn't follow, each other on social media. And, at the time of the robbery, I didn't even have a phone because my grandma had took it from me because she's like, with everything that's going on and we don't really understand what's going on with Mia, she doesn't need a phone because she keeps going missing. So somehow she's contacting somebody to pick her up or run away or whatever's going on. So I didn't have a phone at the time. So I never hung out or knew of Tay-K. I've never met Pimpies a day in my life. I don't know who Letharian is, and I don't know who Sean Robinson is.
Well, there were 3 girls involved. It was you, Ariana, and a girl named Megan.
And there was also 2 other girls.
And 2 other girls, right, that were unnamed.
Correct.
So 5 girls.
5 girls.
You guys get into a car and head to the house.
So 13 days before this crime ever occurred, an FBI agent knocked on my mom and dad's front door. And they said, we have back pages, Instagram, Twitter accounts, photos of her being taken in and out of strip clubs. We have video cameras of her being in hotel rooms for X amount of time. Your daughter's being trafficked. And so my parents were instantly sick to their stomach, okay, this makes sense. What does this mean? We knew something was going on with our daughter. We didn't know what it was. We thought that she was being a bad, rebellious kid. So obviously there's something bigger here that's going on. And I wasn't at my parents' house at the time yet. I was still at my grandma's. And they laid out all this paperwork and photos and everything of me. being trafficked. And so my dad was like, oh my God, she told us that this was going on. And I called her a liar. And so they told my parents, don't tell her, you need to approach it very lightly, because if she knows, if she's under threats and everything that's going on, she's not going to want to talk to you. So you don't need to approach her. We just want y'all to know that there's an investigation going on. We know who's doing it to her. We've been investigating this for 2 years now. But how the feds work is they're going to build their case for however many amount of years or time until, they can nail the coffin in. They're not like the state where, okay, we allegedly think that you did this, so we're going to go pick you up. No, they're going to wait years and years and years, and they're going to have so much X amount of footage or proof or, eyewitnesses and stuff like that until they, take you to court. And so my dad couldn't help it. He was getting phone calls, hey, from my brother's friend saying like, hey, Mr. Vince, like, we're seeing, really bad pictures of your daughter on Instagram and Twitter, and, she's literally completely naked. And we know that this is Benny's sister, and she's only like 14, 15 years old in these pictures. She's just a kid. So, like, what can we do to help y'all? Like, we need to get these pages taken down. And so my mom and dad came and picked me up from my grandma's house, and they're like, you're not staying here anymore, because the FBI agent told them, like, we know that she's staying at her grandmother's house right now, which is, right in the trafficker's den. He's right next door. He's right down the streets. They have complete access to her. And my parents came and picked me up from my grandma's house and brought me back home. I was really sick and super malnourished. And so my parents were trying to get me better first. They took me to the doctor. I had strep throat. I was super malnourished. My hair was falling out. There's so much going on where they're like, okay, we need to get her on antibiotics. We need to help her. So I'm at my parents' house. And then my mom and dad sat me down and like, hey, we want to talk to you and, let you know that we know a little bit of information. So when my parents told me that they knew what happened, I just broke down and I was apologizing and telling them how sorry I was. And they're like, no, don't apologize, but we need you to come and tell the police and confirm what they know. So my parents drove me down to a Fort Worth police station. They took me under they have tunnels in Tarrant County. So they took me to this underground tunnel to speak to these detectives. My interview with them was probably 3 hours long, and I'm telling them everything. And I'm telling them, if I'm telling you this right now, I can't go back to my grandma's house. I can't go back with these people. They're going to hurt me. They're going to kill me. They're going to beat my sister up. They're going to pull a gun on my brother. They might kill my mom and my dad. They might kill me. There was already 3 different reports of them kicking my grandma's door in and pulling me out of my grandma's house. So I'm like, I know that these people are going to come looking for me. And the police promised me, we're going to give you protection. We're going to have police outside of your house. This doesn't have to happen to you anymore. We have a case open on you now. So just go back to your parents' house and, you'll be okay. So I'm thinking, it's finally over. I don't have to do this anymore. My parents know, and they're not mad at me, and they're not ashamed. And, the police believe me. I don't have to worry anymore. This was 13 days before the crime happened. Fast forward 13 days, my mom and dad go to work. My parents were going through a divorce at the time, so my dad wasn't living at the house. My mom was at home. My brother was there, and he didn't know anything. My parents didn't tell my brother what was going on. They just said, hey, watch your sister tonight. There was a knock at the door, and it was Megan. And she was like, hey, we're going to take Mia to the pool. Well, I was super sick with strep throat. I was on antibiotics, and I told her, I'm not coming. Well, then here comes Ariana. She comes into my parents' house, and she's like, get up off the couch. You're coming with us. So, of course, I do what I've always done, and I oblige. I go with her. We're in the car. We were at a swimming pool that day for maybe 15 minutes. I'm sitting in the shade. They're smoking weed. I wasn't smoking. I wasn't conversating. I was super sick. I didn't even want to leave the house. And I'm thinking any minute police are going to come, and they're going to swarm us, and they're going to arrest them, and they're going to take me, because now they see that they came and got me again. I'm waiting for the police to come. I'm thinking somebody's coming, or maybe my brother told my mom, hey, Ariana, picked Mia up. And maybe my parents will tip the police off. That never happened. We leave from the pool, and they go to some apartment, and that's where they meet with Letharian and Sean and Pimpies. And we're there for maybe 2-3 minutes. And then I get in the car with Ariana. Ariana's driving, Megan's in the front seat. I'm in the back seat with Pimpies and Tay-K. There's another car where there's 2 other females who get in the car front seat and passenger seat. And then Letharian and Sean get in the back seat and we're driving to this house. And she was like, hey, do you remember that kid, Zach, that we would get weed from a couple times when our dealer was out of weed? We're going to go over there and get some weed real quick, but will you go inside and get it? And I'm like, okay, I'll go inside and, grab it. This wasn't anything out of the normal. I would always go in and pick, stuff up for her. So I went inside the house when we got there. And the car that drove behind us, where the other two girls were driving, Letharian and Sean, pulled up to the side of the house. And so I went inside the house. I was inside for maybe like 3 or 4 seconds, but then Ariana and Megan come in. So I'm thinking like, that's weird. She told me to come in here and get weed. Well, Zach at the time had said like, oh, hey, we don't have any weed right now. Like, y'all have to come back later. So we all leave and go back to these guys' apartments. I'm sitting in the car outside. I literally, like, strep throat is when your tonsils are so swollen and you're sick. And so I'm sitting in the car outside. They went inside for maybe like 30 minutes. She said that they would be right back. Well, they all jumped right back in the car after 30 minutes. They're all smoking weed and listening to music, and they went right back to Zach's house. And so she was like, hey, he said he has weed now. Go inside and like grab the sack. Same exact thing. I'm inside for like 2 or 3 minutes. Megan and Ariana come in. Well, Megan and Ariana are inside the house for only like a minute. And Megan jumps up and she's going to the kitchen to get water. And Ariana went to the front door. And then all of a sudden, there's all these guys came in who had like shirts on and masks on their face. And they had guns drawn. And as soon as I saw the guns, I ran out the front door. I didn't stay there. I didn't wait for them. I didn't care about what Ariana or Megan were saying. These were people that I didn't know. As soon as I saw the guns come into the house, I shot straight to the front door. I was the first person out of the door. I never heard shots go. I never saw anybody get shot. I heard the shots go off. I never saw anybody get shot. So as soon as I saw them come in, I was running to the front door and I immediately heard like the first gunshot. So I ran out the house and, everybody in the case always says, like, oh, Tay-K had like the least involvement and Pimpies had the least involvement. I believe that is true. I believe that Ariana and Megan, wanted to go rob this house because this wasn't anything that they didn't do already. And they wanted to go, rob the house. I believe Ariana needs to own up to the fact that, she was probably trafficked at one time too. She was under the control of, a man who was taking money from her and was probably pimping her out on one time too. I think, she was significantly older and made, decisions on her own. She was like 22 or 21 at the time? I was 15 years old. Everybody in this case was so significantly older than me. And so I didn't know that anybody died. I didn't know anything that happened. I didn't understand what was really going on at the time. I just ran out of the house. I went back to my mom's house that night. And the only reason that, Ariana picked me up that day is because she said that I had to go to the strip club. So, she seen how sick I was and was like, okay, well, you probably don't have to go to the strip club today. So as they're driving to the house the second time, I'm hearing them say like, hey, let's just hit a lick on them real quick. Let's just take it. They said that they just got, some weed or they're packing or whatever. Like, let's just take it and rob the house. So I had said, I was sitting in the back seat. I had said like, can you just take me home? You already said that I was super sick. Like, can you just take me home first? And she's like, no, now you already know too much. Like, you're coming with us. Like, you're going to go inside and I want you to get the weed. And so they were talking in the front seat like, yeah, Zach likes her. She could just go in and have sex with him. And, that will distract everybody. So I'm thinking like, okay, this is nothing normal. I always have to go into hotel rooms or go into, these strip clubs and have sex with men. So they want me to go inside and, have sex with Zach. And I'm told her like, I'm so sick. I don't want to do that. And she's like, we'll just go in and get the weed then, just go inside and grab the sack. I'm not even inside for, 2-3 seconds before Ariana and Megan, rushed inside the house. So I'm like, okay, maybe they're not, robbing them. We're just going to grab the weed. And, I'm in the house and I didn't know that these people were coming in. I didn't know the other people in the car. I didn't know Sean. I didn't know Larry. I didn't know Pimpies. I didn't know Tay-K. And I didn't know the 2 girls that drove them.
Well, when the 4 young men burst into the house, Sean ended up shooting Zachary in the shoulder. And Letharian killed Ethan Walker, who was 21 years old at the time. and had a 3-year-old baby, who's luckily not in the house. So the shooting breaks out. You don't know what happens, but what happened after the shooting?
Right. So I had no knowledge about, I didn't know if the people who came in got shot, because I knew that, the house was a known drug house. It had been robbed before. They had guns there. Like I seen Tay-K's sister say in an interview, like, oh yeah, they tried to rob that house, months before and was unsuccessful. No, that house was robbed months before. We had nothing to do with it. I had nothing to do with it. Ariana had nothing to do with it. None of the men in the case had anything to do with it. It was a whole entire different set of people who went and robbed this house. Mansfield PD testified on the stand. This is a well-known drug house in Mansfield with guns and weed. So I didn't know who got shot. I didn't know if anybody died. I didn't know anything. And so I was arrested, the very next day after all this, had occurred. And they pulled up to my house with Texas Ranger, the SWAT force, APD, Fort Worth PD, Mansfield PD. And my mom was like, thinking it was for my brother because my brother was in, so much stuff at the time and drugs. And he had, history of stealing from people, like in our family and stuff. And so my mom's like, hey, I think the cops are at the door for you, Vinny. So my brother ran to the garage and hopped inside of a recycling bin. So my brother's hiding in a recycling bin and they come to the door and like, we're here for Mia Santoro. And so my mom was like, well, it looks like y'all are here, for a murder suspect. And they're like, oh, that's exactly why we're here. She's the suspect of capital murder right now. So they arrest me, they put me in handcuffs, they take me down to the Mansfield station. And, I thought I was being smart at the time and was like, I watched the first 48. I know how this goes. I'm not speaking without my mom, dad, or a lawyer. And they're like, oh, you don't want to speak? And I'm like, nope. And they're like, well, we have 2 girls, which were the initial girls who drove with Ariana and Sean to the house, placing you here at this crime scene. And we have Zach saying, the last person he saw that night was you. And so I'm like, I'm not speaking without a lawyer. So they let me go. They're like, if you're not going to say anything, we really can't, connect you to anything. If you were just the last person he seen, he was shot, he might not know what's going on. So we have to release you. So they release me. I go back home. Now it's my 16th birthday. I turned 16 that day. So I'm at home with my parents. And I guess they go and pick up Ariana and Megan. Well, Ariana and Megan, tell it all, name all the names, say that I was there, say that everybody else was there, told the story about what happened. So now they're putting pieces together. Well, then they picked up my brother. My brother was like, yeah, she said something about, there being like a robbery last night. I don't know what happened, but yeah, she was definitely there. Well, now they have my brother placing me at the time of, the robbery. So then they came back and picked me up. And this time, they drove me past, when they picked me up from my house, they drove me past like the crime scene. It had like tape all around the house. And the officer asked me like, were you here last night? And I just looked at him and looked out the window. They take me to the police station. Now they're really like hammering down and questioning me and asking me what happened and said like, everybody in this case is saying that you were the mastermind. We have, everybody pointing the finger at you. They said that you made them, commit a crime and go and rob somebody. And now somebody's, life has ended. And so, I'm freaked out. I didn't know the severity of capital murder or attempted capital murder or aggravated robbery or, any of this. So I'm just like, take me to jail. If you're not going to let me like speak to my mom and my dad and you're not going to let me, speak with an attorney, take me to jail. So they take me to Kimbo. I got booked inside Kimbo and they charged me with all 4 counts of capital murder, attempted capital murder, aggravated robbery, and attempted aggravated robbery. And so I'm charged with all 4 charges. They're pointing the finger at me. They're saying I was the mastermind. And I really just don't see how people don't understand, how did a 15-year-old make all these adults in this case go and commit a crime? I didn't have a gun. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a phone. I didn't know any of my co-defendants besides the people who were trafficking me. I asked to leave that night. I said I didn't want to be there. And the headlines is trafficking in itself. Y'all are trying to say I need to go inside and have sex with somebody so y'all can come in and rob them. Well, I was underage and that's still legal. That's still trafficking. You can't make me go inside of a house and have sex with somebody so you can rob them.
Okay. Well, because in most states, including Texas, if a felony turns deadly, everyone involved gets charged with capital murder, not just the trigger man. So in this case, all 7 co-defendants, including yourself, are charged with capital murder and aggravated robbery.
Right, besides the 2 girls who drove the car with both of the shooters to the house.
Why were they not charged?
I have no idea. These are the questions that my attorney was asking in my trial. Well, technically there was 9 people. So why were the other 2 girls not charged?
Did you personally know the other 2 girls?
Never met them a day in my life. Apparently it was like Letharian's girlfriend and her friend or something like that.
Okay. Well, initially, wasn't everyone offered, aside from the actual guys who pulled the trigger, right? Wasn't everyone else offered like a 10-year probation and an ankle monitor?
Yeah, so me, Pimpies, and Tamor were the youngest people in the case. Everybody else was in their 20s. I was 15, Tay-K was 16, and Pimpies was 16. So I believe that Tay-K was allegedly charged with, or I don't know if he was charged, but allegedly Tay-K was involved in a crime where a college girl was shot in the head. And he didn't get charged with that. So basically they were going to do, what they did in the first case. Like, hey, these juveniles in the case, they're juveniles, they're young, there's 20-year-old people in the case. We already have Letharian saying that he was the shooter. So what we're going to do is we're going to put ankle monitors on them and we're going to give them all 10-year probation deals. So I was supposed to go to court in like 2 days. And my court-appointed attorney at the time was like, hey, they're going to put an ankle monitor on you if you're willing to, be on house arrest while you await for like a deal or a trial or whatever you want to do. So, I'm like, okay, I'll take an ankle monitor. So they put me on ankle monitor first. I got released by Tim Minikos and put on ankle monitor at the house. And once I got released on ankle monitor, I was supposed to come back 2 days later to see if I was going to be tried as an adult or a juvenile. And so I was at home for 2 days on the ankle monitor and was waiting to start like pre-jury trial where they have to pick your jury out and decide if you're going to be a juvenile or a adult. And then I was already in jail for I was in jail for almost 4 months before Tamor and Pimpies were like arrested for the crime as well. And so I was already in jail. And so I got released on ankle monitor first. And then they came and they were in jail for a little bit. They got released on ankle monitor as well. Well, fast forward to when I was about to be, decided if I was going to be a juvenile or an adult, my attorney came to me and was like, hey, 2 of your co-defendants cut their ankle monitors off. You're the only one left on ankle monitor. The judge is thinking about putting you back in jail because he thinks you might be a flight risk. I'm like, well, I didn't cut my ankle monitor off. I'm not planning on cutting my ankle monitor off. And they're like, yeah, well, the judge feels like, it was a slap in his face because he went out on a limb and let the juveniles in the case out on, ankle monitor. So he feels like you need to go back to the juvenile jail. And I go in front of the judge and he was like, the judge told me, like, my plan, especially for you in your case, we've had, FBI and police officers come to us and tell us, like, hey, she's a victim in this case. 13 days before the robbery happened, her and her parents were here telling us that, she wants to confirm that she was a victim of this sex trafficking crime. So we already have a whole case file on her for trafficking. So she's a victim. We don't believe that, she planned or masterminded this crime. We don't believe that she was, coercing all these people to go inside this house and, commit this robbery. She was a victim. She was a child at the time. So, technically in the state of Texas, there is no affirmative duress. Like, there is no duress for you to go to court and, claim like I was under duress while this crime happened. And so the FBI told him, like, hey, as you should probably treat her like a victim in this case. We understand that there is no, defense for that. So the judge is like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer all of them 10 years probation. And it was literally like the next day where these kids cut their ankle monitors off. So that was taken off the table.
So Tay-K and Pimpies end up cutting their ankle monitor off and going on the run.
Correct.
And while they're on the run, Tay-K releases a song called The Race. And in the song it said, fuck a beat, I was trying to beat a case, but I ain't beat that case, bitch, I did the race. And this song starts to go viral and actually starts to chart on the main charts. So how are you feeling when you're sitting there fighting a case, you end up losing your ankle monitor because of the situation?
No, I
and
didn't.
There's this huge song. Nope.
No, I didn't lose the ankle monitor. The judge brought me in front of him and was like, don't make a mockery out of me like these two kids just did. Like, if you cut your ankle monitor off, I'm going to make an example out of you.
Got it. So you still have your ankle monitor, but now, because of this song, this case is starting to get national attention.
Correct.
Even people like academics start to comment on it. And academics referred to you as a 15-year-old thought in one of his monologues.
I do not like academics. Like watching, and I've always watched from the background and the sidelines, and I've always, I had a really good attorney at the time when I won my appeal, who kept my identity, safe. And so it's if you looked into the case, all of the Star Telegram and the news are saying this girl was being trafficked from age, 12 to the time of this murder. And here comes academics. Oh, this 15-year-old thought, she set up this whole entire, robbery and plan. So when I spoke to you, I'm like, oh, I'm definitely going, to do an interview with Vlad because he's the only one who's never spoke on me or called me a 15-year-old thought.
Okay. So now you're in this very high-profile case. It comes, because of all this publicity from the song, it's just a local Texas case that local news is picking up. And now the whole country and the whole world, to a certain degree, is now on it because Tay-K is suddenly a famous rapper overnight.
So everything definitely switched after that. There was 10 years probation on the table. They were really not hammering down on me. In the beginning, they're just we want you to understand what happened that night. Somebody lost their lives. We know that you weren't, the person who pulled the trigger. We, from our knowledge, we don't think that you were the mastermind. Everybody at the end of that robbery went to a house and the only person missing from that house was you. So naturally, they pointed the finger at the person who wasn't there to come up with the story that, hey, if anything goes down, what's our story? I wasn't there for that. So everybody pointed the finger at me. And everything switched after this song went super duper viral. Ethan Walker, the man who died in the case, his mom is an attorney at the juvenile that we were all being prosecuted at. In the beginning, we were going to get 10 years probation. Well, now this case is worldwide. Well, now, she's already lost her son, they're going through, the courts and the motions of everything. And so now they're like, okay, this is our friend that we work with. This is our colleague. She's best friends with the judge. She's best friends with my court-appointed attorney. She's best friends with the DA, Sharon Wilson, the head DA. Apparently they're super close. So now they're like, okay, we're going to make an example out of these kids. And, you're our colleague. You're our friend. We know you. We share lunches together. We fight cases together. So I'm going to make it my duty to make these kids an example for you.
Well, Ethan Walker was actually adopted by a white woman named Roberta Walker, who was a court-appointed attorney. You've kind of referenced this at this point. And she made some comments about this whole situation. She said that although you may have been trafficked, a black girl in your situation wouldn't have caught the attention of an anti-trafficking organization or eventually been offered probation. She said, I've represented many, many defendants who were equally victimized and didn't get nearly the same sympathy she got because she was a cute little white girl.
That was one of the things that she said at the end to the Huffington Post. Originally, she called me an East Lancaster prostitute. And, I don't think that's true. Look at all the other cases that are worldwide. Cynthia Brown, she's a girl of color who was trafficked, who shot somebody who was trafficking her. She caught nationwide news.
Now we're getting closer to court dates and so forth. And people actually started to plead out.
So once the 10 years probation deal was off the table, they're like, now they're coming at me with 40 years. They're like, okay, now they're offering you 40 years. And, you might age out at 19 and you may get off on parole, or they may, send you to adult prison. So I'm like, I'm not taking that. No, thank you. Next offer was 30 years. Hey, here's 30 years. We want you to testify against Jalen Bell, Tay-K, and the shooter. Nope, not taking that. You can come back with a different offer. Next offer was 20 years. Hey, this is our final and last offer. They're offering you 20 years and they want you to testify against everybody in the case. Everybody's pointing the finger at you, but maybe if you get on the stand and point the finger at them, it'll paint a different narrative. Nope, I'm not taking that. I'm taking it to trial. So I was the first person to take this case to trial. My trial was 2 weeks long. I had a court-appointed attorney at the time because my parents, for some reason believed that he was working in my case for my best interest, which was absolutely not the case.
Well, you go to trial and you end up losing the trial.
So I went to trial. It was about 2 weeks long, and the DAs, in this whole entire court case, they would not allow me to prove any of my sex trafficking defense. Initially, my defense was duress. In the state of Texas, they don't have an affirmative defense for duress. They do now, because I've been testifying at the state and the Capitol and Congress and trying to help this, bill get passed, because if this was passed in 2017, I could have used this affirmative defense of duress. So they're objecting all of my, evidence of trafficking. There was supposed to be like a picture where I was, beaten up so bad and literally left for dead, in the courtroom to show like, this is what happens when you don't go along with what your trafficker or, trafficking people are doing to you. If you don't go along with what the traffickers are doing, this is what happens to you. All of that was thrown out of the court. They weren't allowed to say any of that. They put my brother on the stand. They put my mom on the stand. They put my sister on the stand. They put my grandma on the stand. They put my dad on the stand. And the DA asked my dad, so have you ever seen your daughter get beaten? And my dad said, no, I haven't. And they said, well, did you ever see your daughter get raped? And my dad said, no, I haven't. Or Mia wouldn't be the one on trial right now. I would. And they go, well, you didn't see it, so it didn't happen. So my whole entire trial was just, in the beginning they're saying, we really don't believe that you were a mastermind. We understand that everybody went to this house and pointed the finger at you. We don't believe that. Turning into, this case has national attraction now. Now we're painting you as the mastermind. Now we're going to say you did everything that they said you did. So my trial was very brutal. I was 80 pounds. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Now I'm understanding the severity of this case. I'm understanding capital murder. I'm understanding that, if they try me as an adult, I could get life. And so my DAs, Riley Shaw and Jim Hudson, actually charged my jury wrong and said, you must find her guilty of capital murder because she had a legal duty to prevent what happened that night, but instead she was the mastermind. So when the jury went back to deliberate, they were in the deliberation room for hours. And then I guess they had like a question for the judge and was like, well, what if some of us don't want to find her guilty? Or what if some of us, have questions? And, there was talk about trafficking in her case. And there's, she got on the stand and testified in her own trial and said, I did not want to be there. I asked to leave that night, and they asked me, well, what type of people trafficked you? And I told the DA, people who look just like you, it was wealthy white men. Always coming in to buy a little girl. They look just like you. Pass the witness. We don't want to hear that. So, the jury had questions. They're like, well, we have questions. And apparently the judge went inside and told the jury, you must find her guilty of capital murder. So when they came back for their decision, they found me guilty of capital murder. And I am still, to this day, the only person in this whole entire case who is charged with all 4 counts. Everybody else either pleaded out, told on each other, pointed the finger at me, or the only other person I believe that really took it to like trial was Tay-K. So I'm the only person in this case who was found guilty of capital murder, attempted capital murder, aggravated robbery, and attempted aggravated robbery.
Well, when you get convicted of capital murder, that means the death penalty.
So the judge decided to try me as a juvenile because I didn't cut my ankle monitor off. So he said, you know what? You didn't cut your ankle monitor off. I'm not going to make an example out of you. You're going to be tried as a juvenile. Most the juvenile can get is 20 to 40 years, but they can do determinate or undetermined sentence. So I was sentenced to 20 years undetermined sentence. So that means I could go up for parole in 20 years and they could say, we don't think you're ready yet. Come back in 20 more. I could go back up in 20 more and they say, we don't think you're ready yet. Come back in 20 more. So 20 undetermined sentence. Basically, I got 20 to life.
Right. So here you are. What year were you actually sentenced?
I was sentenced in 2017.
Okay, so 2017, you're 17 years old, being told you're going to do at least 20 years. So there goes your 20s, and there goes most of your 30s. And it could be for the rest of your life. You have no idea. When you have a 2 life, I've known people, they get 3 to life and end up never leaving.
Right.
It's one of those really bad situations.
It's a mind game.
When you heard that 20-year to life sentence, what did that do to you?
I had an outburst in court. And I in my mom and my dad's head, we really thought like, everybody was saying, oh, this is, a story that her and her attorney, like cooked up. Well, we had pages and pages and file and casework and pictures and, all in black and white proof that, I was being trafficked. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't even know these people. I wouldn't even be here if it wasn't because of my trafficker. So, in my head, in the back of my head, I had a sliver of hope. In the beginning, y'all are offering me 10 years probation, but now y'all are, giving me the max on this. So there was a sliver of hope in my head, that like, hey, I might beat this. So when the guilty verdict came back, you actually go home for like a day or 2. So I'm sitting at home like, okay, I just got found guilty. Maybe they're going to give me 10 years probation now that they found me guilty. So the whole point is they want you, they were trying to get me to plead guilty. I said, I'm not pleading guilty to something that I didn't do. I'm taking it to trial. So I'm like, okay, maybe they'll give me like 10 years probation now. No, I went to court and they gave me 20 to life. So I had an outburst in court. But, really, when you're that young, you really don't know what all that time means. You really don't know what a 20 undetermined sentence mean. You don't understand that I'm a little girl. I'm about to go to a place that I have no knowledge of that's about to be real bad. It's a lot different from the Kimbo that I'm sitting in. Or the house arrest that I'm sitting in.
Well, before you took it to trial, what was the plea deal that you exactly turned down? Was it a 10-year probation plea deal or no?
Yeah, so in the beginning, they offered us 10 years probation. But once, Tamor cut his ankle monitor off and made this song, that was off the table.
You end up getting 20 years. Letharian gets sentenced to life in prison for the killing of Ethan Walker. Megan gets 20 years. Sean pleads guilty to murder, and he gets 40 years. Jalen pleads guilty to 2 counts of aggravated robbery and gets 30 years. Tay-K, while he's on the run, ends up being involved in a second murder. This was the robbery of a cameraman that ends up turning into a homicide. Did you hear about that second killing?
I did because once I was sentenced to the 20 years, I was sent to, prison. And so first I had to be in juvenile prison, which is like a TDCJ. And then, then they'll decide like, hey, when you're about to turn a month before your 19th birthday, you're going to come back in front of a judge and we're going to decide if we're going to re-sentence you to adult prison or if you're going to parole out. And so once I got sentenced to the 20 years, to life, undetermined, my parents were like, okay, now we really need to find like an attorney that's going to like help her and get, knowledge on her story and going to be understand what happened to her and be able to defend her and not just, have the DAs and the judge do and say whatever they want. And so my parents stumbled across an attorney called Scott Brown. His name is Scott Brown. And he really worked my case and he really understood what happened to me. And he, became like a friend to me. And so when he was working my appeal, he gave me a phone call and was like, hey, this case is just climbing more and more attention. And, now it's getting even more attention because one of your co-defendants has caught another charge. And, I think that he's actually wanting to hire my law firm as well. So I don't know if we're going to be conflicted or not on your appeal.
Okay. So when you found out that Tay-K had actually killed somebody, what did you think?
I mean, I don't really know.
Right, because this brought more attention to the case as well.
I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, what I feel like a lot of people fail to realize is this is like the third crime that he's involved with now. So when people say like, oh, they made an example out of those kids, I feel like it really started with the fact that, they tried to paint this picture like these were my like acquaintances, like people that I hung around with. And that wasn't the case, So when the DA and the judges are talking to me and, in the trial, they're like, okay, well, they played the race in my trial. They said, did y'all hear that song? This is the type of people that she acquaintances herself with. These are the type of people she hangs around with. This is what she likes to do. This is her lifestyle, which I had never even heard the song until I went to court. And so it just made everything 10 times worse, like worse. And the next year would come and it was even worse. And the next year would come and it's even more attention. And the next year would come and now I've got, people coming to try to visit me in prison and get interviews.
What did you think of that song when you first heard it?
I mean, I think, when you have a wanted poster, it's really hard to answer this question because in one sense, I think, if none of this ever happened, I think that he has a talent. He can rap. I think in another sense, what he's rapping about is absolutely insane. And it is a smack in the face to the court, That's why these judges were like, oh, you're going to make a mockery out of me. I'm going to make a mockery out of you. I got told the same thing. Hey, there's this kid in your case. He's pretty much, making a mockery of the court system. So are you going to do that too? If you do that too, if you pop out with the song or you pop out with an ankle monitor, this is what we're going to do to you. So it's really hard, to speak on Tay-K because, what if he was never a part of this murder and he was still making songs? Would it have ever blown up, But really, this song caught attention because the whole world's like, wow, this kid is on ankle monitor for a very high-profile crime now, where somebody died. And now it's getting national attention, which was also a smack in the face to, the victims in the case, because not only are you making a mockery of the court, well, you're making a mockery of the people's loved ones who are dead, who can't come back.
Well, they eventually catch Tay-K, and he goes to court and he gets 55 years, which is interesting because out of everyone who got convicted, the only person who got more years than him was Lotharian, who got life in prison. So he actually got less time than Sean, who basically shot one of the guys, right?
Correct.
So Sean got 40 years and Tay-K got 55 years, and he wasn't the shooter. In either case, in either the individuals who got shot, Tay-K did not shoot either one of them, but he's the one that went on the run, made a song, made a mockery of the court. And it's interesting how he got the second most, heinous amount of time.
I mean, it's just like I said, the judge said, hey, if you pop out with a song and cut your ankle monitor off, I'm going to make you an example. I'm going to make you my mission. I think that's exactly what they did to him. You cut your ankle monitor off. This is the second case you're involved in. Well, now you went on the run. This is the third case you're involved in. And apparently there was some elderly man they said that he beat up. Now this is the fourth case you're involved in. You're got cell phones we're finding inside the jail. So why do we take a chance on you and give you 5-10 years? We already know what you're going to do with your freedom. So, he made it hard for himself and he made it hard for everybody else in the case. And it's sad, he was a kid too. I don't think that he willingly, just was out here committing crimes. I think it was the people he was hanging around too. All the adults around each of these cases very much played a bigger part than the children did. In his first case, there was an adult. In the second case, there's multiple adults. In the third case, apparently, there was a girl saying that she was a 19-year-old stripper giving a 16-year-old her money. Like, there was always somebody older who had their hands in it.
Well, like you mentioned before, your parents hire a lawyer named Scott Brown. And Scott starts the appeal process. He argued that the juror's decision wasn't valid because the court had mistakenly told them that you had a legal duty to prevent the robbery. And he also said that a retrial would be hard to win without an affirmative defense that took into account exactly how trafficking victims are coerced. So through the process of this whole appeal, the prosecutors actually put the 10 years probation back on the table.
Correct.
Which is honestly a miracle at this point.
Yeah. So,
because they really, let me interrupt you. Because at this point, they already had the conviction. You're already in prison. They could have let it go through the appeal process and, who knows? Because for those that don't understand, for an appeal, 3 judges superior to that judge that sentenced you have to say there was a big mistake that judge made, and a whole new trial has to occur. That's very much of a long shot. So why did they put that 10-year probation back on the table?
No, they didn't put it back on the table. I won my appeal.
Oh, okay. So you actually won your appeal.
Yeah, so if we can backtrack a little bit, I did the, 2 years in TDCJ, which is juvenile court. Then I had to come back in front of Judge Alex Kim, and he either decides if I'm going to be undetermined sentence in adult prison or if he's going to let me out on parole. Everybody in the TDCJ system said, or a TJJD system said, we recommend her for parole. We don't think she's a threat to society. She's done trauma counseling while she was here. She's been in college. She's never had an infraction. She's never been in any trouble. She's been an exemplary inmate. So, we recommend that she goes home on parole. So I have a 2-3 day long trial with Alex Kim. I have all these, experts and FBI agents again coming to my court saying, let her out on parole. And the second that he was ready for sentencing, he had these long paperwork, written out paperwork of what he wanted to tell me. So he already made his decision, but he didn't have to hear what anybody said in the court. He already made his decision. He was sending me to prison because it was right there in front of him. And he's the one that said, I think you more or less willingly went along with your traffickers, and I think that you enjoyed what happened to you. And so therefore, I'm going to sentence you to, and he said, I believe that if I released you today, that you wouldn't be a threat to society. But I believe that you enjoyed your trafficking and more or less went along with what the lifestyle they provided for you. So therefore, I'm sentencing you to an undetermined sentence in TJJD at adult prison. So now they send me off to Hobby Unit, which is the worst women's prison in Texas that you could ever go to. There's no AC. I'm the youngest person in this prison. My first day on the yard, I saw a girl get stabbed in the head. So I'm like, what is this? I'm sending letters home to my mom and dad like, I can't do this for 20 undetermined years. Like, I'm scared. I don't know what's going on. I'm the youngest person in here. My first day there, they thought I was Megan because, once again, I'm not having any attention on me because I was 15 years old at the time. Nobody can name my name, and there's no pictures. There's no nothing. All they ever say is there was a white girl in the case. So now I hit the yard. The guards are messy. So they're like, hey, this white girl in the Tay-K case is here. Well, they think that I'm Megan. Oh, hey, you just snitched on everybody in the case. Come here. I'm like, no, I'm not Megan. Like, I'm Mia. Nobody knows me. So I don't know if you watched the Huffington Post. Like, I had big knots on my head when I was in prison. People thought I was Megan. People thinking I'm a snitch. So I had to literally show my paperwork to the people in prison and say no, this is who I am. This is why I'm here. I've already been in prison for years. All these people are still in Tarrant County about to testify against Tay-K. That's not me. I'm here in prison. I've already been sentenced and convicted. And so I was only in prison for about 48 days, and a security, a officer came down and was like, hey, we're going to walk you security over to the law library. And I'm like, for what? Am I in trouble? And they're like, no, you need to come to the library right now. So I go into the law library, and there's this little phone on the wall that's ringing. They're like, answer that. So I answer the phone, and it's Scott Brown. He's like, hey, is this Mia Santoro? I'm like, yeah, this is Mia. And he was like, is this the girl who just won her appeal? I immediately, my whole body was just chills. I'm like, you're lying. And he was like, nope, you just won your appeal. They found 12 errors in your, trial, and they ruled that you need a retrial. You need to be resentenced and recharged and retried again. So now he's like, get ready to come back to Tarrant County because you're not allowed to be there anymore because technically now I don't have any charges against me. So it was like a week later, they came and picked me up and took me back to Tarrant County. So now I'm in the Tarrant County jail. And, the case is super huge. And while I went back to the Tarrant County jail because I just won my appeal, this is the time where Tay-K is literally like in the trial, like courtroom right there. And so it was weird because when I got there, they put me into this pod and I walk into the pod and I look up and there's Ariana. She starts screaming and yelling and is like, get this pimp snitch out of here. I'm about to, F her up. This is my Cody. And so like the whole pod's like going crazy. And so like they came in, made everybody get on the ground. They came and put handcuffs on me and now they took me and put me in protective custody. So I'm sitting in protective custody for like 9 weeks. And they're like, we're just waiting to see, if we can get a trial date and what's going on. You won your appeal. So now they have to charge you and take you to trial. So I'm like, I can't sit in this, cell for 2 more years. Like, I don't want to take it back to trial if I'm going to be here for 2 years. Like, tell them to put the 10 years probation back on the deal. Do something. Like, get me out of here. I cannot sit in this cell for 2 more years. Because they had me in, like, PC is like a confined space. So you're in there by yourself, 1-man cell. You're getting all jail food. My parents were allowed to visit me, like, once a week through a jail monitor. Can't even make a phone call. Can't get commissary. Can't do anything. And so I was sitting in there for 9 weeks. And he was like, yep, they are going to put the 10 years probation back on the table. They don't want to take you back to trial, unless you want to go back to trial. But I'm letting you know right now, trial's going to be very tricky because, they're going to do the same thing with this duress defense. They're not going to accept it. And now they're going to try you as an adult. So now they can give you the lethal injection. Now they can give you life. You could be the only one in this whole case who dies behind this.
Okay, so you end up accepting the 10 years, obviously.
Well, I told my attorney in the beginning, I'm like, I'm not taking the 10-year probation deal if I have to plead guilty. They're going to have to, I'm not pleading guilty to murder. I didn't murder anybody. I'm not pleading guilty to aggravated robbery. I didn't, rob anybody. And like you said earlier, doesn't matter if you were the person who pulled the trigger. It doesn't matter if you even took anything in the course of this, crime. You were there. You're charged with capital murder and aggravated robbery just for being there. And I'm like, well, I don't want that. I'm not pleading guilty to that. And they're like, this is the only way that you're going to get out of this box is if you plead guilty to aggravated robbery. So I'm like, okay, I'll plead guilty to aggravated robbery.
Okay, so you accept your plea deal, and then you have to go to a hearing.
Yes.
Now, when you show up at the hearing, Ethan Walker, who was the man who got killed in this whole situation, his parents show up. Walker's father holds up a photo of his 6-year-old granddaughter and looks at you and said, I want you to look at this one more time. Her daddy is gone. This is your doing. And he said, I want nothing for you but misery, sadness, degradation, loss, desperation, hopelessness, and helplessness. When this man, who's grieving for his son, says that to you, how do you feel?
But it's completely understandable. I've lost people in my life too. And so I understand the grief process that he's going through. And, I have a lot of empathy and sympathy towards them. I understand that Ethan Walker lost his life that night and he doesn't ever get to come back. His daughter doesn't ever get to have a dad anymore. But at the end of the day, those words that he said to me and that were said to me through this whole entire court process is, the reason I needed to go to like trauma counseling and therapy and needed, like actual help as a child, because not only was I trafficked, but now I'm a part of a murder case. And this murder case has so much attention. So now everybody in this prison is treating me so horribly. So it's like trauma after trauma after trauma. And I'm just like self-blaming and taking into account like everything that's going on. And it was like a very hard thing to process as like a teenage girl who has literally been going through things like this since I was 12 years old.
Well, the judge during this hearing actually made a comment as well. He said that he wasn't foolish enough to believe your sex trafficking claims. And he said, I follow the law even though I don't like it. Basically inferring that he doesn't believe that you should have gotten that 10-year probation deal.
And he doesn't believe I was trafficked.
Yeah.
I just think it's very naive of the court system if they're going to sit here and say, like, oh, I don't believe that you were trafficked, but, you know, I don't want to accept this plea deal today. Then why did you accept it? You know, I feel like a lot of the things that the court does is like for show. Like, I went to court that day and sitting beside me is Alex Kim, the person who just sentenced me to prison. What is he doing here? He's not my judge right now. You know, why did he show up? But like a lot of things that the judges do and like say is like scare tactics and like, you know, they say stuff to get in your head. He also told me, you know, if you mess up any time on this probation, I'll have you sitting in this chair right here with the same handcuffs and shackles on. I'm gonna send you right back to the same prison that you just came from. And so if anybody ever looks at my case or wants to know more or, you know, wants to really understand the mind of a child who's trafficked, everything's in black and white. You know, I'm one of the very few girls in Texas that literally has bookcase after bookcase filled of this evidence that I was being trafficked. It's not just some story that I made up. So for all of these judges to sit in front of me who are literally judges who trafficked people who traffic people, you know, it's like, what are you saying?
Well, in 2023, Tay-K tweeted about you. He said, one of my co-defendants was a white girl who was 16, just like me. They didn't certify her as an adult, but they certified me and Pimp as adults. Pimp got 30, I got 55. She ended up getting 10 years of probation with no deal. That girl is at home right now. Now, with Tay-K being as popular as he is, when that tweet went out, what did you think?
When I immediately saw it, because my family is like, hey, you know, look at this. I don't have Twitter. I've tried to stay off the internet and like live a normal life and not, I've always avoided, you know, watching the videos or listening to the comments until like recently. And when I read that, I'm like, you know, I understand his frustrations. You know, everybody in this case, I'm sure, is probably mad that I'm home, but you really can't be mad at the fact that I took it to trial. I didn't come get on the stand on you. I didn't come get on the stand on anybody. People came and got on the stand on me. He said with no deal. I didn't, you know, cop a plea deal for this and, you know, shake hands with the DAs. They had to offer me this because I won my appeal. There was over 12 different errors in my trial. Everybody else in my case had the same opportunity to do what I did.
Well, just recently, Tay-K had to actually get tried for the second murder. And this was the murder of photographer Mark Saldivar in 2017. This was while Tay-K was on the run. He ends up going to trial, and at the very end, he gets 80 years. Now, whether this runs concurrent with the 55 or consecutive, I mean, it almost doesn't matter at this point. 80 years is 80 years. Tay-K is, 22 years old right now? If he has to do his whole 80, he'll get out in the age of 104.
I'm 24, so he should be about 24, 25.
Exactly. When you heard about the 80-year sentence, what did you think?
I actually watched the whole entire trial. And,
Okay.
I mean, I used to back in the day was so full of hate and so mad about everything. And I used to get so upset and I couldn't watch like videos and I couldn't listen to the tweets. And like I said earlier, like, you know, like I seen people sending me stuff about, you know, academics calling me a thought. I used to couldn't watch any of it because it would make me so upset. And I actually sat and I watched this whole trial and I actually really feel bad for him. And I feel so bad for his sister. And I, you know, there's a level of accountability that these adults in this case need to take. You know, I don't really know what happened with the case with him and Mark or whatever. A lot of it really didn't make sense. But, you know, if he was the trigger man, if he wasn't the trigger man, at the end of the day, I think these football numbers that they're giving him and that, you know, how they've been treating him and hauling him back and forth to court and from different county and county, is simply because of the song that he made and the publicity that I got. If you could backtrack and this case never came out and this, track never came out, I don't think that they would be giving him those numbers.
Yeah, I mean, there's really been a conversation on Vlad TV with people like Mano, who, has done significant amounts of prison time, whether it's really fair to give a teenager life in prison, essentially, over something they did, even though it was a heinous act. But, I'm 51 right now. I'm a very different person than I was at 17 or 16. You're 24. You're very different. You're now married. You have kids. You look at life way differently. And should you be punished for the rest of your life for something you do as a teenager? Do you feel that 80 was just way too high for him?
I mean, I'm not a judge, and it could never be my job to hand somebody those years, because, when my attorney ended up passing away and I went to his, repass, and the DA was there and he came up to me and he tried to shake my hand and give me a hug. And was like, I'm glad you won your appeal. I've always known that you were a victim. I wanted to drop your case. I'm so sorry that, I had to talk to you and treat you the way that I did. It's like sometimes I feel like these judges and these attorneys and these lawyers go home at night knowing, you just sent somebody to prison for the rest of their life who you think might be innocent or might not have had a hand, that you say you did. In the first case that he was involved with, he was, completely escaped, being in trouble for that. In the second case, I'm pretty sure he didn't have any involvement in that, I didn't hear about him being a shooter or planning it or anything like that. So the 55 years in that was pretty crazy. And then the 80 years, now they're saying that he was the gunman. Maybe he's like, all this is going on, maybe now he is committing crimes. I don't know. Allegedly, I don't really know if he did or if he didn't. If he did, this is Texas. This is what they do to people. A child rapist will get 2 years for raping and almost killing a little 2-year-old girl. Get 2 years. But, a kid who was involved in a crime is going to get 80 to life.
Well, you had some thoughts about the whole Tay-K case. You said, my main point of wanting to do this interview is because everyone around the world right now is saying free Tay-K. And they're so saddened by this 55-year conviction followed by this 80-year conviction. But all three of us juveniles, Tay-K, Pimpies, and me, we were all offered ankle monitors and 10 years probation in the Ethan Walker case. He had a second chance, but he decided to cut off his ankle monitor and made the Ray song, which made it very difficult for me when I took this case to trial, which led me to a 20-year-plus conviction. I had 2 judges tell me that I enjoyed being sex trafficked after law enforcement testified that I was the victim. I would never have been at the crime scene if it wasn't for my traffickers. I did not set up this robbery. I never had a phone or a car. I didn't know any of my co-defendants besides my traffickers. And ultimately, I wouldn't be free today if the DAs truly thought I set up this robbery. I was forced to take a probation deal. And now I'm still on probation and stuck with a felony conviction for the rest of my life. I have degrees that I can't use. And I've spoken to the Senate to pass laws. I helped pass the law where you have to be 21 years old to work at a strip club. I work to help children who are trafficked and forced into criminal charge and have no voice and no help. Mm-hmm. Is that pretty accurate in terms of what you're thinking right now?
Oh, yes. No, it is accurate. I think, the whole world, the internet is a very dangerous place. And that's why I've never, wanted to come out and do this interview. But, everybody's sitting here saying, free Tay-K, he needs a second chance at life. He's gotten multiple second chances, and the way that the route that he took, affected him and everybody behind him. Just like my conviction affected me and everybody in my family. People don't understand what you do in life doesn't just affect you. It affects it affected the victims in the case. It affected their family. It affected your co-defendants. It affected you. It affected your family. And so I think the world is so desensitized to the fact that people died. In the case where he's with Mark Salvador, they're saying he was, the alleged shooter. His family has to go to this courtroom and, basically hear and see, the videos and footage of him dying. I know when I went to court, I didn't even know that anybody had died in the beginning. But when I go to court, they're showing the video of Ethan Walker taking his last breath in front of me in court. So, when you commit these crimes and, you know, whether it's allegedly, whether you did do it, whether you didn't do it, I don't know, you know. But I have a paralegal degree, and the way the law works, you know, is he's gotten chances, and he's also taken it to the very limit of his life. You know, like I've seen his sister talk bad about me. I've seen his uncle get on there and say I was the mastermind. Like, so was I the mastermind in his first case, the second case, the third case, or the fourth case? Because I didn't make Tay-K do anything. I didn't make him go inside that house and do anything. He was his own person. I didn't make the grown people go in there and do anything. I did not set this robbery up. I did not get anybody robbed. I wasn't anybody's girlfriend. I was a victim, and I was being trafficked. And even if I willingly was a prostitute or anything, that's unheard of in Texas and any other state. This is not a willing thing. You cannot willingly say, please sell me for sex to grown men because I'm 13 years old. That's unheard of. So everybody saying, you're not a victim, you willingly did this. It's illegal. That's literally why you walk inside of a nail salon and they say, see something, say something, stop trafficking. Like, this whole case has so many layers to it. I could tell you so much stuff that has gone on in this case. But, you know, nobody wants to tell the real. Nobody's going to stand up and say, these DAs are crooked, these judges are crooked, these jury people are being charged wrong, they're making an example out of kids. How is it that, you know, all three of the kids in the case, me, Pimpies, and Tay-K, we weren't on anybody's stands. We didn't go testify in anybody in court, but all these adults are going to point the finger at the children in the case. It just makes no sense to me.
Well, there is a silver lining to all this. Now in 2025, you're married and you have 2 kids.
Correct.
So you were able to put this hell behind you. And now you have 2 small children that depend on you. And you can make sure that they never go through what you went through.
Correct.
You know, when you look back on it at this point, do you feel that at certain points, if you made different decisions, none of this would have happened?
I mean, honestly, for a long time, I looked back and I've beaten myself up. And like I said earlier, I was a very, you know, like angry person. And it took, you know, a lot of like healing and counseling and like really understanding how the child brain works. You're not fully developed until you're a certain age. And, you know, that's why they have different laws for children, because you're not understanding what's going on. You know, me as a 24-year-old woman today, you could never traffic me. You know, you could never get me to do any of the things that I did when I was 12, 13, 14, or 15 years old. I would never be friends with Ariana today as a grown woman. If I ever saw my children hanging out with somebody like that, I would put an immediate stop to it. You know, they say that you can't say what if. I've said a lot of what ifs, but if I went back and changed anything, it would probably change the course of who I married or the children that I had, or, you know, the fact that I've come home, I have my associate's degree, I have my bachelor's degree, I have a paralegal degree, I've spoken at the Senate, I've met the governor, I've spoke with him and his wife, I've fought to change these laws, I have raised millions of dollars for Nicole's Place in Austin, which is a home to help girls who are trafficked. And I've done so much work, which has made me the person that I am today. So I really can't go back and say, I wish I would have done this, or, you know, I wish I would have, you know, gotten more help then or now, or, you know, I think that sometimes, you know, people go through things for them to grow and change and, you know, make a difference. If anything comes from this interview today, you know, I hope that it shows that, you know, children can go into the system and change. Children, you know, are not always going to be criminals for the rest of their life. I've been on probation for 6 years. I've never been in trouble. I've never dropped a dirty UA. I've never had run-in with the laws. I've, you know, completely changed my life. You know, I do so much work for, you know, the community now. And, you know, I have 2 little boys. I'm a mom. I look at my children. You know, my 2-year-old is able to do multiplication and math, and he's so smart, and he talks, and he thinks that I'm the best thing in the world. I can never, you know, look at him and not pay attention to him. I can never look at him and say the things to him that people have said to me. I could never, you know, just throw my child away the way a lot of the times I felt like I was thrown away by law enforcement and these judges and these DAs, you know? What if something would have happened when I told the law enforcement what happened when I went and spoke to him and he said, you know, you don't have to worry anymore. You know, we're going to be there to help you. These people aren't going to mess with you anymore. Just go back to your mom's house. I could never, ever, ever look at my son and say, you know, you're a liar. I'm going to go check on that. You know, you're saying somebody's raping you. You're saying somebody's trafficking you. I'm about to go check. Show me where these people are. I'm not going to call him, you know, crazy or a mental head and put him in a home and pump him full of drugs, you know. You know, my dad wanted to come to meet with me today to this interview, and I had to tell him, like, you know, you have to sit this one out, please, because there's a part of this story where you're really not the best person in my life. You know, I have a really close relationship with my dad now. Him and my son is like best friends. He loves his popsy. But there was one point in time where my dad wasn't there for me. He was too worried about, you know, a bottle or the women he was cheating on my mom with, or, you know, my brother. There was one point in time I didn't have a dad to turn to that I felt very comfortable and confident in. There was a point in time where, you know, I was scared of my dad. I didn't know how he was going to react. And it hurts me to get up here and shed a light on the fact that my parents were simply not there. The attention that I needed was not there. And so, you know, it's very hard to do this interview today, and I don't know what's going to come about it. And I know how, you know, the internet works, and I know what people are going to say in the comments. And, you know, I just wish that my story could change another person's life. I wish my story could make one judge or one DA or one attorney say, hey, let's stop and look into this case. You know, let's not treat her like a criminal. Let's see the victim side of her. You know, I feel like a lot of people around the world need to be educated. The comments that I see where they're like, oh, she was a prostitute or a 304 and she set these people up. A child cannot be bought and sold. A child cannot make a decision for themselves and say, please traffic me. I want to be pumped with drugs. I want to be sold across the state. This is simply not it. People need the awareness and the education and the knowledge of what goes on with these children, and parents need to really, you know, I've even heard in the trial where they said that, you know, Tay-K was in foster homes and his parents didn't care about him at one point. You know, his mom was in prison and his dad was here and there. Like, if there's one message that I can get out to the world today, please pay attention to your children. My parents would have paid attention to me when I needed them the most. A lot of this stuff would not have happened to me.
I have one final question for you, and I think you have a very interesting perspective. Like right now, the Diddy trial is the biggest thing that's happening in the world. And along with Rico, he's being charged with sex trafficking. Have you been following the trial at all?
I haven't looked into it at all because this is what's wrong with the world. You know, my trafficker wasn't P. Diddy. You know, my trafficker was a regular man who lived in a house, who preyed on young little girls, who had a woman go recruit girls from high school. My first initial, you know, time I was missing, I was picked up from a high school football game. You know, that's not the reality of trafficking. You know, I'm not getting $30 million for coming up here and speaking to you. You know, Cassie or whatever her name is, I really haven't looked into it, but I saw where, you know, she's getting $30 million of hush money. A real person who's being trafficked in today's world is not the person who's taken, like the movie Taken. It's not Cassie. It's not, you know, that's a whole different underworld of industry trafficking. I believe, yeah, she was probably a victim at one point. And I really can't speak too much on that case because I haven't looked into it, because that's a whole different type of world. That's not what was happening to me. I was being trafficked right under my parents' nose, right under my grandparents' nose. I was being trafficked in the inner cities of Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, taken to Vegas. This is a whole different underworld that people just turn a blind eye to. The second somebody says sex and what follows is trafficking after it, they don't want to hear about it. They don't care, you know, but now people want to talk about it because P. Diddy's name's, you know, attached to it. You know, back in 2016, people weren't talking about trafficking when my case came about. I didn't know trafficking. My parents didn't know trafficking. You know, people knew the term like pimping. People didn't understand, like, no, they are trafficking these little girls. There's so many cases there's another case where a girl was taken to a park and she was told to perform sex with the man in the car for money because they were trafficking her. And then her traffickers ended up, shooting and killing the man for like his watch and money or something like that, and now she has 20 years plus. This is the type of trafficking that goes on in our inner cities where they're manipulating these young girls. They're, focusing on children. I can't speak on the Diddy trial. That's a grown woman. I was 12 years old when I was first introduced to like the strip club. I was 13 years old when my virginity was taken from me being raped. Like, that's a whole different type of case.
Well, yeah, and that's the reason why I mention it, because I think that in a situation like this, because of how much publicity it's getting, they're calling it sex trafficking. But when I think of sex trafficking, I think about what happened to you. Underage girl, drugs, prostitution, being put in motel rooms where 20 men go in and out of the room, being forced to strip, being forced to engage in all types of crimes and so forth. That's the type of trafficking that I'm thinking of. Having a male prostitute flown in so you and your 25-year-old girlfriend can have threesomes, I don't really consider that trafficking. I consider that consensual. And yeah, okay, there's probably prostitution involved, but these are all willing participants. And I feel that a situation like this really sort of whitewashes a situation like yours, which really is trafficking. But yet, both of them have the same title when it comes to law enforcement.
I don't really know how to word it because I don't want to say the wrong thing. But it's like you said, I've never really looked into the P. Diddy case. I believe probably that there could be children involved, but...
No. At this point, there's only grown people involved. There hasn't been a single child. There's been some allegations and some civil cases, but none of that has actually gotten to this trial, which makes me think that none of it's actually true. Everything involving the Diddy case is all people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s.
So, if anybody gets educated on trafficking really is how a trafficker build a trauma bond with you, how you can build, Stockholm syndrome, how they at one point make you feel like you're a willing participant. You're under complete threats, being beaten. Like I said, I was burned by cigarettes. I was beaten. There was guns involved. But like you said, I was a child. So me being 12 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old, 15 years old, I was terrified. You tell me you either get raped or you either go to the strip club or you either go make this money for us or we're going to go do it to your sister. You want it to happen to your sister? Well, no, I'm going to take it because it's been happening to me. Please don't touch my sister. I'm going to take this. That's a whole entire different, conversation than, I saw the video where he was beating her up in the hotel room. I've seen you say too, that's domestic violence.
Right.
And I believe the video that I saw is domestic violence. I've never looked into the Diddy case. That right there is domestic violence. But what happened to me is minor sex trafficking.
Well, Mia, thank you so much for coming in. I think it's very brave of you to actually do it because this happens so much and you never hear about it because there's not a big rap song associated with the case. This is happening in small towns all over the world and it's being brushed under the table and the victims are not stepping forward. And it really broke my heart hearing how you went to the police and they just said, oh, she's crazy, let's put her into a mental institution without actually doing the due diligence of finding out whether some of this stuff is actually true, because that could have completely changed the direction of your life at that point. So once again, thank you so much for coming in. And I think that this interview is going to affect people in such a way that there's going to be some phone calls that are made. People are going to have conversations with their parents. There's going to be some police that are contacted. And I think that it actually will make a change.
Well, there was one point in my case where my attorney, Scott Brown, was like, if your case doesn't get the, if you don't win your appeal, your case is about to get the attention that it needs. I'm going to, reach out to Kim Kardashian. I'm going to reach out to, Ashton Kutcher, or whoever I can reach out to who understands trafficking and can, push some, celebrity publicity behind your case, and thank God I won my appeal and I didn't have to do that. And now, I feel like I can speak into a light where it makes sense, where I'm I'm older now. I understand what happened to me. I've tried not to cry on this interview because there's a stigma against trafficked people that they're just an emotional wreck, and that, they're sensitive and, you can't talk to them and they don't know how to control their emotions, and it's a very emotional thing to speak about. Even, it's been over for years, I still have, my nightmares. I still see the marks on my body. I have a husband where at one point, I'm like, oh, I'm scared for him to know what happened to me. What if he thinks, like I'm disgusting or I'm, I don't know what, I never thought that I would be married and have children. I didn't see past, the wall that was in front of me. But, there's so much more to this story. I've danced around a lot of the topics. This is my first ever interview. This is my first time ever coming, public and telling my story. But I mean, there's so much to it. My case is so crazy. Like there was times where my grandma came home and the door was kicked in and I was missing, and she made police reports and they told her that it was a robbery, and she's like, no, my granddaughter's missing. And they're like, no, I mean, it looks like your house was ransacked a little bit. It looks like a robbery to me. There's time after time that I was failed. And I, was glad to do the interview with you. Like I said, you've never spoke about me. You've never spoken to me in a bad light. I think that anybody who sit here and called me a 15-year-old thought, I pray that you read into and look into my case and really understand how that is completely wrong and cruel to do to a victim.
Well, I know DJ Academics. I know that he watches a lot of my interviews, so I'm pretty sure he's going to watch this one. And hopefully that's going to get him to change his mind and publicly speak about it because... Well, I just want to say this. Personally, I believe your story. I don't think a 16-year-old masterminded a robbery murder. I really don't think so. You were the youngest person there. You were a kid. You were surrounded by older people. And yes, it's easy for a bunch of people to get together and say, we're going to point at her. But ultimately, based on what I've heard, and I've went through the research, as you could see, I went through the whole story, and I felt that I believed you. While going through my research, I cried a couple times reading some of this stuff. I cried a couple times while you're explaining it. And at the end of the day, I believe what you're saying, and I'm glad that you're home. I'm glad that you're married. I'm glad you have 2 kids. I'm glad that your probation is going to be over in a few years. And thank you so much for speaking on my platform.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm also thank you so much for getting behind it, because I know it can be a very controversial topic. And for you to even say that, I want to say thank you so much, Vlad.
Absolutely. Wish you all the best, Mia. Take care.
Thank you.
Peace.